Hi, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces. I see a lot of new faces. Hopefully by this end of this presentation, we both feel like we know each other a little bit better. And also, this is a perfect size group for it to be a little bit interactive. So if you have hands, if you're able to raise your hands on a couple of things, I'm going to do a little bit of call and response. Also, there are interactions. There are graphics. My lovely fiance is a designer, and she's did this thing for me. So we have, it is present throughout the presentation. It's just thematic. There are a lot of dinosaurs. I love the theme. I leaned into it heavy. So just bear with me and just enjoy it. I also am not the only dinosaur presentation this week, so you're getting dino heavy. So kind of a subtopic, and to get a little bit more kind of academic and on the meat of the presentation, we're going to be talking about personas and complex systems. Both are different disciplines and can have some scientific and academic terms, but we're open source. We're just going to move fast and do as best as we can with the resources we have. So we're going to try to put our product manager hats on as well, and then dive into some of these scientific concepts that may not be, that may be a little bit more hairy when we don't have the ability to collect all the data. So my name's Dawn Wages. I'm a Python community contributor. So my 9 to 5, I work at Microsoft as a Python community advocate. So if you have thoughts on Python and any of the Microsoft ecosystem, I may not be able to help you immediately, but I can find someone who does. But if you specifically have thoughts on Django in VS Code and IntelliSense, that's my bag. I would love to talk to you about that. Gathering feedback. That's my 9 to 5. And also, thank you to my employer for sending me here. I am the treasurer for the Python Software Foundation. I've been on the board for just a year. Elections start June 1st. The closing of nominations for board seats is the 15th. Elections start June 20th and end on the 30th. So please participate. There are several levels that are able to vote. That's the contributing, managing, and sustaining members and fellows. So please be involved with the Python Software Foundation board elections. And you can also do that online today. I'm also on the core team for WAGTAIL CMS. I have been since 2020, as WAGTAIL is a content management system built on top of Django, and it is an opinionated CMS for the opinionated web framework. You'll see a lot of intersecting communities as I talk about them today, some concentric and eccentric circles, and a lot of facets of community talk. I'm also the creator and an advocate for the Organization for Ethical Source. Me and my team of Lee Gill and John Soto, we created the first anti-racist ethical source license, and we are down for the conversation of what does capital O, capital S mean, and can your ethical source license still be capital O, capital S open source? And I would love for everyone to keep in touch. So it's so exciting to be here. And so now that you know me, you can keep in touch with me on mastodon.online. You also have my website there. And my web, as the social apps keep changing, you'll find all of the latest there. So what this presentation is and is not, it is a fun way to view stewardship of your community. We talk about personas, complex systems. It's gonna get actionable tools, not just philosophical concepts, but there's not gonna be any type of tutorial on community. I don't even know what a tutorial on community actually would look like, but this is not that. And there's not a case study, although I will be name dropping certain communities and comparing them amongst each other, and we'll probably disagree, and that's for a good thing. Here are the slides for my presentation, and also a QR code. I'll give you a second to do that if you want to follow along. There are some random weird words that I created because, I like to be fun and punny, and our excellent team of captioners were able to help me out with that. And my 3D models by my excellent fiance who's starting an agency, and she's absolutely brilliant. It's called Augmented Reality Design and Development, ARD. And if you're familiar with Philadelphia, I'm from Philly. If you're familiar with Philadelphia slang, ARD is like, all right. So it's ARD, so when you're doing a confirmation. Anyway, it's a very cute pun. I'm very excited for her. So let's start with some assumptions. First, iteration. This is never going to be a one and done activity when you're managing a community. We're going to iterate over KPIs. KPIs are key performance indicators. This takes macro objectives into your micro actions. Like, for example, your monthly or quarterly meetings. If you are interested in gaining new contributors, maybe at the beginning of your meeting, you should announce the number of new contributors you've had. We iterate over some of these concepts. It doesn't have to just mean metrics. My favorite type of check-ins is when I have small meetings with Organization for Ethical Source. We do PIES check-ins, so that's P-I-E-S. That would be starting with your physical, that would be your intellectual, your emotional, and then your spiritual check-in. It's easier with smaller groups, but it really brings the ethos of your organization, what's important to you first. So I'm going to continue hearkening back to the theme of an iterative approach. Bias will always be there. It is not something that we should ignore or also just accept, but we should know that it is on the horizon, and should be an ever-present goal to try to eradicate bias as best as we can, but we will never be done. Bias will always be there. And I'll talk more about vantage points and how we address bias or how bias creeps up as well. And capitalism. So, value of our time is now equated to the value of the yield produced in that time. We are all production engines in this system. Sometimes community can just be the praxis. Sometimes community can be the goal. And as I go through this presentation, I might not always mention that, but sometimes the goal is just community. It's not always about creating the best product out there, although that is our goal. We want our widgets to do the thing really, really well. So I want to also emphasize that capitalism will give us the idea to practice our craft, but we also want to implement community praxis. And growth is not always the most important thing as well. So sometimes small groups are really important, and they're nimble and agile, and we don't always have to get bigger, and sometimes we join bigger groups to do bigger things. So we will start with some DINO definitions, then we'll look at DINO examples and classifications, then we'll look at a community map, and then we'll do some community map comparisons. This talk is a more grown-up version of my first ever talk that I've done. I was noodling over these concepts between like 2016 and 18, where I was learning about complex systems and network clusters. And if you've watched the PyCon keynote by Carol Willing, she had an amazing metaphor and talked really candidly about our community and different nodes and relationships in our community. And I'd like to think this is in like the same cinematic universe of Carol Willing's talk, and I really appreciate her lens on that. So if you haven't seen that yet, when it releases, go check that out. And hopefully this is also a journey as well. So complex systems are systems whose behaviors are inherently difficult to model. It is in the name. Dependencies, competitions, relationships, and other types of interactions. Complex systems also is a discipline in science, so some examples are like climate, we have organisms, human brain are incredibly complicated, infrastructure constraints, transportation, communication. We have complex software, and then in this example, we'll be talking about social groups. And there are also social groups that interact with complex software, but the noun today, the it, are the people. As I mentioned, and this is a science in and of itself, so if you're interested in learning more, there are several levels of evaluating the science. So the interdisciplinary approach, there are scales to complexity. There's also adaptability versus efficiency. In the paper that I mostly reference when I talk about complex systems in this talk, but then also other things that I write, is the Introduction to Complex Systems Science and its Applications by Alexander F. Siegfried and Jenner Barl-Jan. So my favorite part of this domain is that it's interdisciplinary and how we're organizing ourselves. So my undergraduate degree is in business, and my favorite class was strategy. And we had this one class called where we talked about Porter's 5 forces. So we had competitors and systems, and it talked about the symbiotic relationship. So keep in mind some of those systems in this example. And personas. What do people think, feel, and say? Also, a little bit more about me is my background is in e-commerce. So we had big budgets to sell widgets, to track down people, to talk about how they bought widgets. And as we got more specific with our communities, it's very common to find marginalized communities of age or race or gender, and inviting those people into the conversations, making sure that these are data-backed assumptions that you're making, and then the goal is to just paint a fuller picture of a person. But we're not using people this time because this is a less than scientific approach. We're using cartoons. So this is all based off of the archetypes of dinosaurs in my childhood favorite movie, The Land Before Time, a 1988 classic. Can I get some hands on who knows The Land Before Time? Oh, yes, this is so good. Okay, great. I was really worried it was gonna get lost. Okay, you don't have to know A Land Before Time to get this presentation, but it's just gonna be a way that we talk about people's motivations and strategies. I come up with some fun and silly names. Please laugh, I enjoy that. At my heart, I am a comedian. Not a good one, so please enjoy this with me. So here are the dinos. Let me introduce you to my 7 friends, the OSS Dino personas that serve as a mental model for us. So we have the Apprentice-Rex, the Talk-About-It-Ophis, the Bang Your Head Against the Wallosaurus, the Watch and Listen-osaur, the Ptero-Python-Party-o-Dactyl. I think there's gonna be some of those here. Yeah, we've been partying it up this week, I guess. We also have the Race to the Finish Raptor and the Aquaridon. I think there's all 7 of them. So a lot of words. I'm going to be comparing them. These are their motivations. The Apprentice-Rex, we have a species known for their uncanny ability to find the experts and ask the questions. And these are people who love to dive into the work and treat development like learning a trade. To the right of that, we have the Bang Your Head Against the Wallosaurus, similar to the Apprentice-Rex, where they love to jump into the code. But they start with building and thrives on a demo. It's distinctively more solo and prefers quick starts into jumping in the code, running into bugs and problems, and just hammering their way through it. On the next line, we have the Watch and Listen-osaur. This open source dino enjoys case studies, videos, likes to sit back and watch tutorials, specifically watching it work while it's happening and learning their way. So we may have some here at the conference who love to learn this way. Beside our friend of the Watch and Listen-osaur, we have the Ptero-Python-Party-o-Dactyl. They're interested in community building, friendships, not just the music and social gatherings, but really perhaps learning through osmosis, making friends that last along the way. On the far right of the second row, we have where theory meets practice with the Talk About It office. They love to chat in the hallway. They like to dive into the theoretical and the conceptual. And this one I think is the most likely to me to be the polyglot. They're comparing concepts in one language to another. How does garbage collection work in one language versus how it works in Python, for example. On the third line, we have the race to the finish raptor, where we are zooming to our proof of concept, then to our MVP, and to our alpha. They are really focused on the features. It is maybe less about the community. It is mostly about, does the hammer knock the nail in? And finally, we have the Inquirer-Don. So this may be a researcher-first approach. They love to become an expert and really focus on mastery of their skill, perhaps. And then how do they interact with the community? What is their motivation? So apprentice programs, pair programming, sprints, open source contributions for the Apprentice-Rex. We can see core code and tracebacks, maybe demo projects and third-party packages for the bang your head against the Wallosaurus. The watch and listen disorder might like live streams, for examples, or podcasts or videos. The Ptero-Python-Party-o-Dactyl will appreciate the code of conduct, for example. I've been to a really great conference where we had like a knitting circle. It was kinetic something hour or whatever. Very nice, lovely ways to communicate with your peers without necessarily doing it right in front of code. I think I really resonate with them, although I don't identify as the Ptero-Python-Party-o-Dactyl, because I think I learned through osmosis. I've gained a lot of friends through the community, and that was one of the quickest and best ways for me to learn when I first got started. And I consider myself one of the people who is a community-taught engineer or a self-taught engineer through the community, and that was really helpful. The Talk About It of us enjoys maybe Twitter spaces, for example, or Twitch streams or webinars. They like meetups and office hours. They liked Django Under the Hood, for example, or deep dive tracks. The Race to Finish Raptor will love Django's to-do list app and the other demos that just kind of start with, third-party packages, blog posts with demos and boilerplate code. And the Inquirer-Don, as I mentioned, they're interested in mastery, so maybe mastery courses, and they're addicted to collecting reference books, as I know a lot of us can relate. Here are the personas again. As I mentioned, I'd love to get to know you all. So what about the Apprentice-Rex? Who in here thinks they might be an Apprentice-Rex? That was me. I don't know. That was okay. What about the Talk About It of us? Yeah? Okay, we're getting more. What about your bang your head against the Wallosaur? Okay, this is a large group. I got that. Okay. What about the Ptero-Python-Party-o-Dactyl? Okay, yes. Okay, we got some energetic ones too. The watch and listen dinosaurs. Okay. And the Race to Finish Raptor. Okay, there we go. That's maybe like a good 5%. And the Inquirer-Don. Loved mastery. Okay, I love that. So as you raise your hand, you might have seen your friends raise your hand. As you evaluate some of these things later, you'll be able to find groups that are like you, but also team up in complementary ways, and you can figure out other ways of approaching it. But really, this is just a mental model on how other people approach things differently than you, and as you're tending to the community, evaluate how other people's incentives may not be the same. And who am I? So I said we're going to get to know each other. I am definitely the Apprentice-Rex. I started this journey through kind of an apprenticeship, for example. It was hard for me to get the first Django job. And so I did my first apprenticeship, and then I consulted for 2.5 years before I got my first, full-time engineering, senior engineer Django job. And so it was a little bit of an non-traditional path, but maybe it's more common than I think, and maybe I'm putting the signal out there to meet you and we can talk about that. I also like to be a talk about it office, and maybe this whole presentation just outs me very quickly as one of those, but I love concepts. I love being able to wax poetic about some of these things and really, bring it home that way. So I find that fun. So, complex systems. So this is not at all the full list, obviously, or else it would not be a complex systems, but here are 10 of the key themes that I find in creating a healthy community, and the ones in a little bit darker green are the ones that I'm going to talk about today. So funding sources, code and community health checks, code of conduct and safety tools, the 0 to hero experience, so really kind of turning around very quickly and giving that feedback loop and some of those endorphins quickly, and documentation. Funding sources. So this gets complicated and can be an entire presentation in and of itself. I'm the treasurer for the Python Software Foundation, and I've also been in sponsor roles on a number of Django conferences, Europe. DjangoCon Africa is coming up in November. I hope to see people there, and if you are part of organizations that might be interested in sponsoring DjangoCon Africa in November, please feel free to reach out to me or the team sponsors at djangocon.africa. We also have DjangoCon US, which I'm a co-sponsor chair for, and that's coming up in October. Money and sponsorships has been working harder for that relationship since 2020. I'm so excited that we're coming back in full force and doing so in really safe ways. But a lot of times those are contingent upon pre-existing relationships. So the people who are most connected have an easier time funding their conference. And it's not fair, and I don't have an answer to that solution, but being able to put that on people's radar and recognize that people with the coffers, with the funds, should be reaching out and looking for opportunities to invest back into their community in ways that don't always float to the top of their timeline. So some thoughts on how to understand and follow the money in open source. For example, who owns the trademark? That costs money. Figure out who does that. Who finances the conference? That costs money. Where do people who write the code work? Is there anyone maintaining the code who is employed as perhaps a developer in residence or fellow? How about a company or companies that employ a particular person, maybe full-time or part-time, to work on that particular project? What about perhaps a company paying for a specific feature? So understanding some of the nuances and dynamic of the way that your open source code has been funded, and whether or not it's funded, and whether or not people who are creating that tool for you are making a living wage. Figure that out. Are you donating to them on some type of semi-regular basis? Or people in your community on type of semi-regular basis? There are so many ways that these relationships shake out and with aligned incentives, and it really behooves us to think about who and what jives with our sense of justice and equity and compensation in open source. And I think there's definitely a way. It is complicated, but there is a way that our source code can be open and free while people are compensated for their labor. Code and community health checks. So I put these in the same bucket, although they are very different concepts, for example, or in their application. So all check-ins should be happening iteratively, as I mentioned, but this is really an opportunity for you to create a rubric for success. And to frame it in a different way, it's also a check on common gotchas. A healthy project has new contributors, so as I mentioned, you could be checking in quarterly or monthly meetings to see what the number of your new contributors are month over month. A healthy Django project should be able to, for example, manage its files. So did you know that you can run python.manage.py check? And Django uses the system check framework to check for common Django problem gotchas. I think in this approach, it's very one and the same. You are using a systematic way to evaluate what a community health is looking like. Do yourself a favor of building those guardrails for your community by defining what good or successful looks like, and then checking in. Code of conduct and safety tools. Never underestimate the power of building around the people and the most marginalized people in your community. It ends up making the entire community feel more safe, and it is hard and uncomfortable and weird, fluffy conversations that is not like code at all, and it really relies on some human and interpersonal reactions, but that practice is really important, and you will learn a lot by practicing it, and they will gain a lot by you practicing. Zero to hero experience. So these are one of the things that I really love from being in Django Girls. That's actually my first way that I wrote any Django at all was in Django Girls. And there is a setup of the tutorial that lets you have endorphins at a really nice pace. And so as you're building your project, understanding what it takes to get to that first bit of serotonin may keep people coming back. Documentation. So where intuition falls short, documentation should get us the rest of the way, which is all of the way. Our favorite communities have a little bit of all 10 of these, but attributes, as I mentioned, that complex systems get very complex, and these are broad strokes and simplifications of what healthy communities can look like. So our most favorite communities may be able to relate to some of these. For example, Django. So the ones that are highlighted are not at all, or the ones that are not highlighted doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I've been in the Django community for a while, and I work in it, and I see some in all of it. But this is really where I feel that Django stands out. Django, the batteries included Python web framework. And I've resisted the urge to talk about Django in each of the previous slides because I knew we were going to get here. But we have I wanted to highlight the code and community health checks and the ease of use and abstraction. Code of conduct and safety tools is really part of their success story, as well as the documentation. It's been represented, but key to some in the next few slides are my opinions and vantage on some of these other frameworks and languages. Python. So in the spirit of a challenge, I did not highlight all of them, but for the most of these areas, Python's readability, some even call it a delight to write, more than I've ever heard in other languages. Again, I am biased, but dev tools and web tools have had an excellent few years in Python in particular. That's been coming up in recent PyCons and DjangoCon, so it's been really exciting story to see a lot of support for Django in particular. For example, VS Code is very dedicated to having a top first-class Django IntelliSense. We also have PyCharm, which is fantastic, and there's, obviously, no love lost. I love PyCharm as well. So just having more to the ecosystem, and we have choices to be able to help us write Django faster and better. Also, there's been really cool news about Python security and infrastructure, something that's always been a priority for the PyPA team, Python Packaging Authority team. And I'm really excited for events to come back. So for those planning Python events, there's a really great Python event Discord called Python Conference Organizers. I'm happy to connect you to them if you are interested in joining that chat. And it's, I think, twice a month. And they just get on Discord and they just talk about trends. WAGTAIL CMS is one of the leading content management systems built on top of Django. They're really focused on the zero to hero experience. Again, I'm biased. I'm picking frameworks and tools that I have access to and I've seen and I'm really proud of. This is a popular framework of a different size that provides a very specific solution to Pythonistas. They're really extending some of the opinions of Django to an opinionated CMS, and we can see if we agree on their opinions. The ease of use and abstraction and how the turnaround time for a quick wow are among the other notable things. JavaScript. So a high-level, dynamically typed, just-in-time compiled interpretive language. That's 98% of client-side applications have in their stack. I would call that a very successful language. I would call that pretty successful. And so why do we think it stands out? Some of these things we would not be able to say like 5, 6, maybe 10 years ago about JavaScript with their maybe documentation or the zero to hero. I started JavaScript when jQuery was out, so that was like, let's drop it in and see if it works. And I think one of the ways that it really is successful in the community, not only is there a large ecosystem of like offshoots, for example, there's like the whole ECMAScript system and the organization of that governing body, but they have consistent funding sources, jobs remain consistent, and the pay for each of those jobs kind of remain in a large range and remain pretty high over the years. So people keep flocking back. Vue. So Vue, created in 2013, is in TypeScript, extends HTML attributes and focuses the programming experience around the view layer. So people flock to Vue because of the documentation. There's also this Vue playground, the way that it's been able to use for small widgets, and you can kind of ramp up your experience, and you can start small, are really practical approaches on why Vue has been really helpful, and the community has been really, really successful. The zero to hero and the documentation and ease of extraction are also part of its success story. And we can't look at Vue without talking about React, a more mature and a much larger community where everything is a component with its own life cycle. And where is it in its life cycle? It's pretty standout, well-funded, and there's consistency in React careers and pay in the ecosystem as well. And we have it as a kind of a standout in the progressive web app framework because of its consistency. And Rust and Python interoperability has had a really awesome story in the past several years. It's a well-documented programming language. They don't say it's very easy to learn, but it is well-documented. Provides solving very modern problems in an interesting community. So the community feedback and able to kind of ponder on some of these problems has drawn a lot of people as well. As I mentioned in the previous slides, there were by no means a sense of measurement of the community, but these are all kind of harkening back to having certain vantage points. So if you disagree on any of my positionings of the community, that's great, and it means that you have a different vantage, and so you can explore some of the other opportunities, or you can introduce a friend to something new. And so we have how you can be a part of that community. So did I get those Ptero-Python-Party-o-Dactyls? Well, if you raised your hand, maybe you want to do events, but think about community and code health checks. The way that you interact may be completely different from the process-oriented friends who want to do the health checks, and you could be able to give an experiential view on exactly what may be going on and what a healthy community that feels in party with each other needs. I would also encourage you to partner with the Watch and Listen-osaurs. We challenge you to team up, and you get a really great picture of engagement and what content is being put out consistently. You'll get the IRL and the online activities. What about the race to finish a raptor? Like, they're kind of like the pragmatic, maybe the fly-by Django not users. They really just need it for a tool, and they don't really care about much else. I would say that maybe they're not particularly loyal, but that's okay. Like, no harm in that. But they're notoriously hard to capture in engagement metrics and hard to get back. If you have someone who really feels like they're a race to finish a raptor and you're sticking around in the community, maybe you have insights and ways that we can capture some of those metrics in the very beginning, at the start of their journey, and then figure out ways to keep them coming back. And then bang your head against a Wallosaurus. Maybe you're really good at ease of use and abstraction. You can talk about that experience with your collaborators. You can determine on a lot of levels on what should be exposed and what are common problems in reducing friction. And all of these are really in Congress with access and ownership. So as you're entering a new community, being able to access elements of the community and then immediately feeling like you are able to own parts of that community, so you can engage with the system and change it for the better. You don't have to go it alone. And to quote an African proverb, if you want to go fast, go it alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And so in summary, complex systems are complex. Personas are a tool for empathy. Comparing complex systems is contingent upon vantage and is riddled with bias. And we can go farther together.
All right, thank you very much for that. That was amazing. So we have enough time for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to walk up to the mic. So just raise your hand.
Hi, Don. Thank you. Wonderful model presented. I wonder if you have any tips on creating personas to match your community. It seems quite difficult.
Yeah. So not all of us want to use the land before time metric. So in previous roles for e-commerce, we had a lot of data. One of the ways, the tips that I've used for a number of open source communities has been through job roles, mostly, kind of. So I'll have one for tech lead, senior, junior engineer, apprentice. A lot of this will come from data and research, and even if it's anecdotal data or qualitative data, it is still data nonetheless. But being intentional with your approach in trying to ask the questions of these different segments and what they need is important. So research is the short answer.
Okay, any other questions?
Thanks, Dawn. Can you give me an example of actually applying those ideas, those personas, maybe in this community or another one where you've seen it actually work and what kind of results you've seen?
Yes. So, for example, one of at Microsoft, we have a onboarding experience. We want to really focus on I guess what we would consider the zero to hero experience of VS Code itself with Python. So we create opportunities for people to ask with maybe zero experience, and we try to meet them where they are. We're experimenting with different contact methods, so we have Discords, we're starting live streams more often, and then really doing that iterative approach on what kind of questions are we getting, and then are people doing the feedback loop, are people satisfied at the end. So the live streams have actually gone really, really well. I am not a live stream person, I am learning, so some of you may see me on live streams and know that I am learning. But it's been going really well, and people like the opportunity to have those questions answered. And it also one of the things as well is because we don't necessarily say outright that it needs to be people new to our product, we have moderators of different skill levels in there to be able to be agile as well. And that's been pretty successful.
Hello. Thank you for this very interesting talk. In the Django community today, these last weeks, there's been a sort of discussion about leadership and diversity in leadership. And I wonder if you think that you need the kind of diversity of different personas in the leadership as well.
Absolutely. I think it's specifically, so you can't have a new role for every persona necessarily, and you can't just create one because you're a different personality than others. It doesn't always work that way. We got to get things done. But I think that naturally a lot of responsibilities will fall in line with people's personal skill sets. So really evaluating what persona you are and how you differ, and then feeling like you can impart value in a particular role is one of the ways that happens. But I think it's a service to ourselves to be able to offer what we can after we've done some of that internal work as well.
Hey, Dawn.
Hello.
You were talking about how growth doesn't have to be the only goal,
Yes.
Which I really like. But I do think that growth is easy to measure.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are some of the other goals you think something can strive for, and how best to measure it?
Yes. So some of the qualitative work, so it's really, really hard to describe the shape of and like the value of a particular interaction. For example, is two people you met who are now going to walk away as advocates and just like heroes of your product, is that more important than just letting 100 or 200 or 2,000 people know that you exist? And that's really conceptual, and it's really part of what like future goals are and what you're actually positioning. So it's really personal to each project. But I think I love surveys. People hate surveys. Maybe give them a reward for doing a survey. But that is one of the ways that people can do it. But just kind of checking in and then really trusting that feedback that you give, and then we iterate. Yeah.
Okay, more questions? Excellent. Thank you very much, Don.